Suburban Sentinel here, along with Bella the camera cat. Today I wanted to discuss a little bit about prepping and firearms. Specifically, I want to talk about handguns and ammunition. Certainly every prepper needs to stock firearms and ammunition. I also believe that is important for every prepper to have at least one handgun. Handguns have certain advantages over long guns, namely being lightweight and relatively small in size. The issue becomes what type of handguns should we keep in inventory and how much ammunition. Now, there are several popular strategies with respect to storing handguns and ammunition. I just want to go through a couple of those quickly. Sorry about the mag. My UPS guy just came by delivering these Magpul AR magazines. I've been wanting these for a long time. I've been using strictly the GI issue mags, and I've been taking a look at these, and man, these are really great. I can't wait to get these to the range. Anyway, I digress. One strategy is to have either a single handgun or multiple handguns of a specific cartridge or caliber, and just keep a ton of ammunition in that caliber in inventory. Now, that strategy does have certain advantages. First, it's simple. You only have to keep track of one or two, maybe three handguns, right, and one type of ammunition. So from a logistical standpoint, it's a little bit easier. Also, it can be lower cost. If you're only buying one handgun as opposed to multiple handguns covering different calibers, of course, your expenses will be less. Finally, it would be cheaper to buy ammunition. If you're going to buy in bulk, you can certainly get a better deal buying 5,000 or 6,000 or 10,000 rounds of ammunition of a single caliber rather than buying multiple purchases of different calibers. But there are some significant downsides to the single caliber strategy. First, availability can still be a factor even if you keep a significant supply of ammunition on hand. The first consideration is bugging out. There is a chance that in some SHTF or widespread emergency, you will have to evacuate your home, and you may not be able to take all of your ammunition with you. So in an evacuation type scenario, it still is an advantage to be able to secure a supply of ammunition from outside market sources. But if you're limited to a single caliber, your chances of finding ammunition will probably be reduced. Another significant risk is that of government interdiction. All of a sudden, the U.S. government or your state may make it illegal to own, transfer, or possess a certain caliber. If the government wanted to divert all 40 caliber ammunition production to military and law enforcement, the government could certainly do that. That, of course, would make it very difficult to resupply your ammunition stock. Another risk is even if you have a big supply of ammunition in your chosen caliber, your stash may be compromised. Whether it's by theft, destruction, government interdiction, or whatever, there is a chance that you could lose some or all of your ammunition stock. Being able to use other calibers certainly is an advantage if your supply is interrupted. A second strategy for storing handguns and ammunition is to keep a multitude of handguns in different calibers in your inventory and have some ammunition for each one of them. Now that has certain advantages. First, you have the redundancy of having many different handguns available to you, and you have the additional benefit of being able to use multiple calibers. The downside, if you have, let's say, 50 different guns and a little bit of ammunition for each one, now you have kind of a logistical problem. Right? Especially if there's like a bug out scenario, you're not going to want to bring 50 handguns with you. Right? You're going to have to select which ones would go and not have a big supply of ammunition for each. Also, there's the cost. Keeping many different guns, of course, costs money, and keeping those guns fed costs big money these days. This is especially important because as preppers, we want to do at least some regular training with the handguns that we would be using in case of an emergency. When I started doing preps many years ago, I looked at this problem and tried to figure out a compromise solution that provided the easy access to reliable arms and ammunition without breaking the bank. So I developed my own strategy, which I would like to share with all of you in the prepping community today. Just a couple of caveats. First, I'm not an expert. Right? I'm not a firearms guru or a prepping guru. I'm just a guy trying to do the best for himself and his family. However, I do have a certain level of experience with combat systems logistics. So this plan is not completely willy-nilly. The second caveat is that this is a work in progress. I have no idea whether this is a good strategy or not. I've never been through a long-term SHTF situation, thank God. Certainly I'm open to new and better ideas from anybody out there. Again, this is a work in progress, and preps never should stay static. The world changes around us, our families change with us, and I believe that our preps have to change too to accommodate the new circumstances. In addition, I have not achieved this plan completely. This is more of a target plan for me. There are certain aspects of it that I have not yet met. So this is really work in progress for me. It's taken years to get to where I am, but I still have a lot of work to do. As with any project, the first step is to identify what our specific goals are. So let me switch gears a little bit here. Excuse me, Bella. And get to our little goal sheet. I don't know if you can read that or not, but we'll do the best we can. The purpose of this project, and I call it my prepping handgun project, is to assure that my family and I have adequate arms and ammunition for extreme emergency events. Now, what types of emergencies? It could be anything. It could be a Katrina type event where there's a major evacuation and civil unrest. It could be another terrorist attack like 9/11. It could be a major disruption in the supply chain of goods and services or an economic collapse. I'm not exactly sure. Reading the tea leaves these days is pretty tough. In this world, just about anything can happen. To facilitate a plan, we had to set some type of basic parameters and make some assumptions about what we're preparing for. And I'm assuming that one or more of these emergency type events might have the following characteristics. First, that the event might last for weeks or months. I don't want to prep for a 1, 2, or 3 day event. I don't think that's quite adequate. Second is that the event would result or could result in widespread civil unrest, rioting, looting, etc. It's not all that pleasant to think about, but I have been through that on a short-term basis, and it does get pretty ugly. The third characteristic is that federal, state, and local police and emergency services could be overwhelmed. And to me, that's a no-brainer. We certainly saw that with Katrina and 9/11, as well as with other things, such as the Rodney King incident we went through 2 decades ago. Next is that the event or events could result in severe disruptions to supply chains. What if an event results in the lack of food delivery, oil and gasoline delivery, something of that nature? And we have seen that before, short term. It may happen long term. We just don't know. The final parameter I want to plan for is a large-scale evacuation. I really would absolutely hate to evacuate our homestead, but I think it's prudent to prepare for that eventuality if it's absolutely necessary. So now that we've established our purpose and parameter, we have certain specific goals, at least I do. The first goal is to stock an adequate number of handguns in various calibers. The second is to have an adequate supply of ammunition for each firearm. Third, to maintain systems redundancy. What happens if there's a mechanical problem with one of your handguns, or one of your handguns is compromised, lost, stolen, or destroyed? Next, we want to minimize the logistical support requirements for our inventory. Having 25 different guns that all operate differently, that use different ammunition, would require an intensive amount of training to be proficient with each one. We want to minimize that logistical burden by having common calibers, by using guns that are simple to operate, and having common guns so that we minimize the amount of training. Finally, and probably most importantly, is we don't want to let the handgun project adversely affect our other preparation efforts. If we spend all of our time, money, and other resources devoted to handguns or just firearms in general, our prepping abilities will suffer. We can have all bullets and no beans, and that's not good either. So it requires a delicate balancing act of our resources. If you have unlimited resources of time, money, and energy, God bless you, but I think most of us don't. So that's kind of the groundwork for where we want to go, at least with respect to handguns. So let's take a look at the specific plan. I came out of the aerospace and defense industries. So I designed this small arms strategy as I would have for an aerospace or military customer with respect to the logistics. I've broken down the handgun project into 3 orders of importance: primary, secondary, and tertiary handguns and ammunition. So let's take a look at each one of those. The first task for your primary handgun and associated ammunition is to select a cartridge. Not multiple cartridges, but one single type of cartridge. Now, I'm not here to get into the caliber wars. 9mm is better than 45, 45 is better than 9, 40 is better than this, that, or the other thing. The answer to all those issues is that everybody is right. Any cartridge is better than any other cartridge under the right circumstances. The question of which is the best handgun cartridge is illusory. It's like asking what's the best type of clothing to wear. It depends. Depends on the individual, and it depends on the weather and what you're doing with those clothes. So again, I'm not here to get into caliber wars. All I wanted to do is select a single cartridge as the primary handgun defensive round. But there are certain factors you can look at. First is the effectiveness of the cartridge. Some cartridges are just more powerful than others. 44 Magnum has much more oomph than 22 short. That's just the way it is. I'm not saying one round is better than the other, and that's just the nature of the beast. But what we want to ensure is that your selection of handgun cartridge is appropriate for you and your family. To a guy living in the suburbs among millions and millions of other people, a small to moderate size cartridge certainly works. If you live up in the wilds of Alaska, where you may be defending against some really big four-legged critters, the 454 Casull may be your selection of choice. I don't know, but we just want to lay out the factors. So one, how effective is the cartridge against the threats you are most likely to encounter? Second factor is availability. Certain cartridges are just more popular than others. The 9mm Luger standard NATO round versus the FNH 5.7. The 5.7, I've never shot it, but it's probably a great round. But certainly, especially in an emergency situation, will probably not be as easy to obtain as a more popular cartridge. Another factor is cost. Unfortunately, we don't get our ammunition for free, at least most of us don't. And storing a significant number of rounds away is quite costly. So $1 a round, 45 or whatever it is now, is certainly much more of a financial burden than 9mm. Again, we have to weigh that cost versus your budget for handgun preps versus your budget for other preps. Size and weight, a little bit less of a factor for handgun cartridges as opposed to long gun cartridges, but again, weight adds up, even if it's only in little tiny increments. In the event of a bug out situation, 380 would be much easier to carry than 44 Magnum. Another factor is compatibility. If you're a law enforcement officer who uses 40 caliber on duty, 40 caliber for your backup weapon, and 40 caliber for your home defense weapons, at least your home defense handguns, then it probably wouldn't make a lot of sense to select 9mm as your primary handgun cartridge. If you already have the handguns in that specific caliber, use them all the time, well, it's only natural to select that caliber. Finally, there, at least on my list, is human factors. Assuming that you're not the only gun user in your family or group, one should also consider the needs of other shooters. I certainly don't mind shooting 40 caliber ammunition, but my wife, who's fairly diminutive, has difficulty with the recoil. So 40 caliber is not the best overall choice for us. I'm not saying it for anybody else, because she shoots 9mm Luger very well, but has difficulty shooting 40. So by way of example, in our household, we chose the 9mm Luger as our primary defense round for prepping. Now, I'm not saying that 9mm is better than any other round. It's just our choice. It's what works best for us, given the effectiveness of the round, the availability, the cost, size and weight, and the human factors. For us, makes 9mm the most attractive option. So again, even though 9mm is not my preferred cartridge overall, for prepping in an SHTF type situation, 9mm works best for us. A different cartridge might work different for you and your family, and that's great. I'm again not here to caliber bash or start caliber wars or any of that kind of stuff. But just take a look at these factors and use this information to decide what works best for you. So once the primary cartridge is selected, the next logical question is, which handgun should one use? Well, again, there are certain factors to look at. First, of course, you want a reliable handgun. A jam-o-matic or something that's just too worn out to function reliably is not appropriate in an emergency situation. Second is you want something that's relatively easy to maintain under adverse circumstances. Maintainability is certainly an issue, especially if it's a long-term emergency. Another factor is durability. You certainly don't want a gun that is going to fall apart under adverse circumstances for an emergency situation. And finally, ease of operation. You want to make sure that every responsible adult in your party can be proficient with the handgun with a minimum amount of initial and recurrent training. I recommend getting at least 2 primary handguns. And I also like those 2 primary handguns to be at least very similar or preferably identical guns. Having identical guns has a couple of advantages. First, again, it minimizes initial and recurrent training, only having to deal with one platform. Second, the parts from one gun can be interchanged with the other. So in the event that there's a failure, you can use parts from one gun to keep the other one operating. Having 2 or more guns is also an advantage because you can now arm more than one person. By way of example, in my family's case, since I'm responsible for selecting the guns and ammunition and all the prepping, I chose the Glock 17 as our primary handgun. Again, I'm not trying to start a brand war. I'm not saying that Glock is better than other manufacturers. In point of fact, I really don't like or enjoy shooting the Glock. To me, Glocks are ergonomically unsuitable. However, they do have certain attributes that make it a good gun for our family for an emergency situation. The Glocks are stone simple to use. They're highly reliable, very durable, and easy to maintain even out in the field. So the Glock 17 was my choice. So a few years ago, I went out and purchased 2 brand new identical Glock 17s. And this, safety check this gun. This gun has been safety checked. This is one of the 17s I bought. Bought them at the same time. Nothing fancy, just Gen 3 Glock 17s. This one I had Crimson Trace laser grips mounted, and I put a Streamlight tack light on. Other than that, it is stock. The gun is highly functional. I don't really enjoy shooting it. I prefer the ergonomics of a 1911 type of grip or a revolver, but I can shoot okay with it. Certainly good enough for social work at close distances, and even more importantly, my wife shoots it fairly well because it's 9mm instead of one of the heavier calibers. So even though I'm not a 9mm guy and I'm not really a Glock preference type guy, I don't seek out Glocks for any other reason than they're very good guns in their reliability, durability, maintainability, and ease of use. I'm certainly not knocking Glocks. I have several of them. It's just this is the best application for it for us. Again, I'm not saying that the Glock 17 or that Glock in general is the be-all end-all. It's what works for our particular circumstances. Or at least I hope it will work for our particular circumstances, if it ever comes to that. Again, I wanted 2 of these weapons for the redundancy and ease of logistics, especially as the primary handgun. So now that one has selected the primary caliber and primary handgun, the question is how much ammunition to stock. I believe it's prudent to keep several thousand rounds or more in inventory. And that is really a judgment call. I think it depends more so on your particular circumstances than anything else and how much ammunition you feel comfortable buying. In my case, I have been stocking in excess of 10,000 rounds, and I never let my inventory drop below the 10,000 round mark. I didn't acquire 10,000 rounds overnight. I belong to an ammunition club, and I'll put up a link to a video I did on starting an ammunition club, and I got rounds 500 at a time, 100 at a time, 1,000 at a time, over a period of years to build up to 10,000. Is 10,000 a crazy number? I don't think so. Being from the greater metropolitan New York area, where there's a population in excess of 11 million people within a 50-mile radius, 10,000 rounds of ammunition doesn't sound like a crazy amount. Again, it depends on your personal circumstances, the caliber, and how much money you want to have tied up in handgun ammo. But if I had to make a recommendation, I would say that it would be smart for anybody to have at least 3,000 rounds of primary ammunition available. So to summarize, as far as primary handgun, you're going to have 2 guns that are either very similar or identical and a few thousand rounds of ammunition. And I think that's a pretty good start, at least as primary weapons are concerned. But since this is a compromise strategy, we don't want to be limited to one type of cartridge or caliber. So that brings us to the selection for what I call secondary ammunition and handguns. So let me just get this Glock out of the way. And we will get right. So for secondary handguns, the plan is a little bit different. My strategy is to choose 2 additional popular handgun cartridges. What those cartridges are entirely up to the individual. By way of example, for secondary cartridges in our household, I chose the .38 Special and .357 Magnum. .38 Special is a decent defensive round. It's fairly inexpensive, or at least relatively inexpensive these days. It's pretty easy to find, at least under current conditions. And it's fairly small and lightweight overall. So it's good in case there's a evacuation or bug out type situation. .357 Magnum happens to be my preferred cartridge overall. I like it for its stopping power, its proven effectiveness. It's a little on the pricey side, but it is my favorite cartridge, and I feel very comfortable shooting that cartridge out of our existing guns, and so does my wife. So the .38 Special and the .357 is what we selected. So once choosing a cartridge, now we move to choosing handguns. My recommendation for secondary arms and ammunition is to choose 2 quality handguns for use with your caliber choices. And again, there are plenty of good handguns out on the market. Just make sure it's a well-built, well-designed handgun that's in very good to excellent operating condition. Again, by way of example, my wife and I chose the .38 Special and .357 Magnum cartridge. And for our handgun choices, at least for the secondary handgun choices, I chose 2 .357 Magnum revolvers. And the reason we took 2 .357s is that both .357s will fire either the .357 Magnum rounds or the .38 Special rounds. So that gives us more options, more flexibility, less demand for logistics. So as a secondary handgun, I think those work. Although they are low capacity, one revolver being 5-shot, the other being 6. Again, this is a secondary handgun, so capacity is not as much of a factor. And the trade-off is there's no magazines to worry about. And you have the incredible reliability of a well-executed and well-maintained revolver. So that's our slant as to the second order of magnitude arms. Again, we're not saying revolvers are better than semi-automatics, that one brand is better than the other. Again, this just works for us. The reason I recommend 2 is, again, for redundancy purposes and to spread your available munitions options into other calibers. Of course, the next logical selection after selecting the cartridges and the handguns is how much ammunition to stock. And again, this was not really scientific, but as a secondary or second level of importance type firearm, I recommend stocking at least 1,000 rounds of each caliber. So let's assume that you and your family particularly chose 357 SIG and 40 caliber as your second order of magnitude cartridges. I would get 1,000 rounds of SIG and at least 1,000 rounds of 40. Again, you want to budget and weigh the cost of storing additional rounds versus the opportunity cost of using the money spent on ammunition for some other purpose. Again, it's a delicate balancing act. Moving on to our tertiary or third tier handgun analysis. Again, same type of thing. Choose a cartridges. Now my recommendation, at least logistically, is whereas the first level you selected one cartridge, second level you selected 2 cartridges, in our tertiary or third order of magnitude selections, I recommend 3 cartridges. And we're back to the same factors: effectiveness, availability, cost, size and weight, compatibility with your existing firearms, and human factors. Again, this could be just about any popular caliber. Whatever you feel comfortable with under your particular circumstances, and there's no real wrong answer. By way of example, for tertiary calibers, I selected 380, 40 Smith & W, and 45 ACP. I selected 380 because I already have a small 380 ACP pistol, so it was high on the compatibility chart. Although I don't think it's the greatest man stopper around, it certainly is a viable defensive round, especially as a third tier selection. 45 ACP I chose because I already have a couple of Springfield 1911 type models available in our personal inventory. The 45 round is a very good round, an excellent self-defense round, although it is fairly costly these days. The 40 Smith & W I chose as a third tier round because it seems to be a very popular round with law enforcement these days, and I hope that it continues to be available, although it is a little bit more pricey than 9mm. Now, as of the time of this filming, my wife and I do not own a .40 caliber handgun. Like I said, this is not a done deal for us. These are target plans, and this is all work in progress for us. So one of the highest things on my handgun to-do list is to secure a very good quality .40 caliber handgun in the near future, and I hope to do that before the election rolls around. Now, just because you're choosing 3 different calibers doesn't mean you necessarily need 3 different guns. With the advanced firearm technologies and the aftermarket parts available these days, of course, there are barrel interchange kits where there are a variety of guns that you can change from one caliber to another just by changing the barrel end or magazine or a few components, and you're off to the races. And a tier 3 type firearm, you're not so much worried about redundancy and having multiple guns being used at the same time. Basically, on tier 3 firearms, I'm looking for a way to shoot ammunition that we can acquire relatively easily. Tier 3 is to give us more options cartridge-wise than for redundancy purposes. So of course, now that you've selected the cartridge and the guns, the question is how much ammunition to stock. And again, this is not really scientific. My recommendation is to stock 500 rounds or more of each tier 3 cartridge. So those are the 3-tier plans. Should you have more ammunition? I don't think you really can have too much ammunition. If properly stored, ammunition has an indefinite shelf life. Even if you don't need the ammunition in an SHTF or really bad long-term situation, ammunition could be a very easily bartered commodity if the dollar collapses or there's some other financial calamity. And in my opinion, with respect to ammunition, Some is good, more is better, too much is wonderful. So I just don't see a downside to having lots and lots of ammunition unless it's either going to take away from other aspects of your prepping efforts or pose an undue burden on your family overall. In addition, my little plan, at least with the selections I made that are, at least in my opinion, the best for our family, the guns we've selected and the associated ammunition gives us coverage of a wide variety of popular calibers. If I implement the plan fully, which I know I'm not done yet, but we're getting there, is I'll be able to shoot 380, 38 Special, 9mm, 40, 357 Magnum, and 45 ACP. And that covers a broad spectrum of popular calibers, so that if there is ammunition to be had, there's a pretty good chance that I'll be able to utilize what's available, because the last thing I want to do in any situation is deplete my stocks until it's absolutely necessary. All right, so that's all I really have to say about the specifics of the strategy. Again, I'm not an expert. I think I've fairly well researched and have enough of a background to make a reasonably intelligent analysis. Now again, this plan referred only to handguns. I have other plans for different types of equipment. Like I have a modified version of this strategy for long guns, which I'll do in a separate video. But this is about the best I could do strategy-wise, given my background and circumstances. So I hope this was helpful to some of you out there. And again, if you have other ideas or ways to improve this, I would love to hear them. So to all my fellow preppers out there, please prep vigorously and regularly, and don't let prepping get in the way of living your life, because that's not what it's all about. We still want to enjoy ourselves, even though we're preparing for the worst. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe. This is the Suburban Sentinel. Be safe, everybody.